Welcome back to another video. In today's tutorial, I thought it would be fun to try out my new palette that I just put together. That should have been a YouTube video either this week or coming up sometime, but I wanted to go ahead and use it. So I picked this picture with these two flowers, and so we're going to go ahead and do this. Now, one of my favorite colors in this palette was this deep sap green, and I thought this would be perfect for the background. I might have to add some neutral tint in with it. Now, I did go ahead and change my sketch from the reference photo, so I will have my sketch available for you guys to download and trace out if you want. But I think I'm going to use these two colors for our background. We're just going to worry about that first, and then we'll come back in with the leaves and the flowers. Now, if you don't have this deep sap green, you can use whatever green you have. So whether it's sap green or hooker's green, and this is the Daniel Smith one, by the way, you can take whatever green you have and add a little bit of red into it. And that'll kind of like deepen it down and make it more of like a muted, more evergreeny type green, especially if you have a green that's a little more fluorescent like this one. And then you can always add a little bit of neutral tint or black or whatever dark color you have to darken it up a little bit. But that's what I'm going to do. So I'll just go over quickly the supplies that I have. So I have my palette, and I took the little insert out of my palette here, and this is what I'm going to use to mix up my color. Because we're going to be using this a lot in the background, we're going to have to mix up enough so that we can use it as it goes. I'm going to do more of a wet on dry technique here. So normally I'll wet the area and then put the color in. But because we're just laying down a flat color of this, we can sort of just make a big bunch of it and then make sure we have enough to cover that area. I've got a couple of brushes over here. So these are my silver black velvets. I've got a size 8, which I'll use for most of the painting. And then I've got a size 4. Now, even though there are some little areas in here, these brushes come to a really nice fine point. So I probably could even get away with using a size 10, but just to make it simple, I'm going to use my size 8. And then for any smaller areas in the leaves here, I'll use my size 4. I've got a little face cloth here that I can dab my brush off. I've got a jar for clean water, a jar for dirty water off to the side. I've also got this little pipette that I'm going to put water in here to mix up our dark color. And I'm also using my Arches cold pressed. This is in an 8 by 10, I believe, block. Yes, 7 by 10, so close enough. So first I'm just going to take my kneaded eraser and lightly lighten the sketch just on the leaves here. Now, I'm not going to lighten it too much that I can't really see where they start and end, because I'm going to have to know where the background kind of goes, but I do want to lighten them just a little bit. Now, if you are sketching this out for yourself and not using my sketch to trace it out, you can always vary up the sizes of your leaves and kind of do them in different shapes and different sizes. That's what I tried to do, just so that they don't all look the same. But these leaves are pretty close to the same shape. Now there's a little bit of like another pink flower showing up over here. I kind of like cropped it in a little bit this way, the photo too, so we only see a little bit of that flower, whereas in the original we see a little bit more of it. Okay, I think that's good there. So I'm going to take some water, and like I said, I've got to mix up enough here that I'll be able to cover like this top area, and then we can always mix up some more for the bottom area. And I'm just going to take my size 8 brush, and I'm going to go right into that deep sap green. And I'm going to add quite a bit of it because, again, I want it to be nice and concentrated. And if I just pull it out a little bit so there's not so much of a puddle, I can kind of see like how dark it truly is. I'm just going to grab a little bit more. And then I think I am going to need to add just a hint of some neutral tint, so I'm just going to grab that and I'm just going to darken it up until I feel it's dark enough. Now I don't want to get rid of that green tinge color completely, but you can kind of see how it's a little darker now. So now this is where we want to really pay attention to our photo, and so I'm avoiding the flower and the leaves, but I'm going to get this color in all of the other places. So there's a little place here between a couple of leaves and a flower. And if you find that this color isn't dark enough for you, that's totally fine. We can always come back and go over it all again. But I just want to start getting some color in. Now watercolor does always dry a little bit lighter than when you first put it in. And I feel like that's dark, but I feel like maybe I want it to be just a little bit darker, really. So I think I am just going to pull a little bit of this down into here just to make a smaller pile. And just have it just a little bit more concentrated, and then I can always pull from that other pile up top there if I need to. But I think I like this a little bit better, so I'm going to start up here, and all of this is sort of open space in between here. Maybe I'll just test this color real quick. In here, there's a tiny little open space in here between the leaf and the flower, and that is a lot darker already, so I think I like that a little bit better. So the trick with doing a big area like this is we want to make sure we have enough paint mixed up, but enough watery paint so that our edges stay nice and wet as we're going and they don't start drying on us. Because once it starts drying, that's what's going to give us those hard edges. So as long as all these edges stay nice and wet as I'm going, then that's going to help me be able to do larger areas like this. And so I'm just bringing that big pile of paint along with me. And I just take it until I start to feel it's getting a little dry, then I just add a little bit more to it. And this color is definitely more the color that I was going for. And we'll just have to see if I have enough paint to last. I think I'll be okay, but it's only two colors that we're mixing up at least, so if we have to remix them, it's really not that hard to do pretty quickly. I want to get back down here where I started that color just so it doesn't dry. So I'm just constantly going over the edges that I've already gone over. And I don't want to drag the paint out too far from where I've got this line, because the further I drag it out, the more paint gets used up, and then the drier it's going to be. And that's going to cause those little hard edges. So I'm always trying to leave the bulk of my paint right at the edge there. Now I'm just trying to make sure that I have, so I'm going to drag a little paint down here, leave a bit, and then I'm going to cover this area. And I might need to just take a little bit of that color and just mix it in here, make sure I've got enough. And so as you can see, as it's drying, we're getting like a really nice smooth area. Oh. And I went over the leaf a little bit, so we'll just change the shape of the leaf a little bit there. No big deal. Now I'm going to take just a smidgen more of this and just a smidgen more of that black there. Just mix up a little bit more of this dark color. There. Now those are still wet, so we can go over those after. And I'm just going to drag a little bit more of this water down here. Now I don't want too much, so I'm actually just going to take a little paper towel and kind of cut that off. But I want enough. I can always add a little bit down here, and I'm going to make it a little bit darker again. So I'm kind of going for that same color. And if one side's a little bit darker than the other, that's totally fine. All right, so I'm going to start doing this bottom part now. And I'm probably going to start up. Maybe I'll start, yeah, I'll start here and I'll kind of work my way down and around. So I'm trying to work as quick as I can, still being as precise as I can. And if I notice there's an area it's a little too dry, I'm just adding a little bit of that mix there. And just smoothing some of the edges. And I'm really liking the background color so far, so this was definitely a good choice. Now you might want your background color to be a little bit lighter. Maybe you want your leaves to be darker. You can totally do that. You know, you don't have to go along with what I decide that I'm going to do, or you don't even have to follow the reference photo. Maybe you want orange flowers or purple flowers. You can totally do that. Now I'm just dragging whatever's left on my brush here because I've got enough to fill in up to this little spot here. And then we've got just sort of like this little hint coming around here. So I'm going to get this in too. You can just sort of like just barely see part of that background color. Now there's a little bit of a puddle going on in here, and it's such a small area. I don't want to leave too much of a puddle, so I'm just going to dab this off. And then I'm just going to pick up whatever I can. Now I don't want to pick up too much of the color, but just enough so that it's not puddling, because that could cause a bloom. But where it's such a small little area in there, it's totally fine. So what I'm going to do now is just give this a nice dry with the heat tool. Then I'll probably come over top of these areas after, darken them up. And I might even just take this and just dab there, just because that was a little too dark. And then I'm just going to go right over top with the color that I have on my brush here. And then it kind of matches the background a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and dry this, and then we'll use the same color for those two areas so all of their background looks the same. And then we'll come back and work on our leaves. And I'm just double checking that I've not missed any little tiny areas in between the leaves or anything, and I think I'm good. So I'm just going to put this brush off to the side here, and I'm just going to hit this with the heat tool. Now because this is sort of broken up into two sections, I'm going to work on the top part first and finish getting this dry, because you do want to dry it evenly, but you want to dry it in the way that it's already drying. And then I'm going to just come down here and start working down here. And I kind of want to work on the area as a whole. So I'm moving it around. I'm not just working on one spot at a time, if that makes sense. And you'll know when it's completely dry because it will dry down completely flat. So if you're still having a little bit of buckling in your paper, then it's just not completely dry. And sometimes if you work on one spot, drying that first, and that spot dries much quicker than the other areas, or if you've got, you know, a puddle somewhere else, that can cause some blooms too, so be aware of that. And you want to make sure these spots are pretty dry. So then I usually just go ahead and use the back of my hand. And if your paper still feels like cool to touch, it's not completely dry. So I'm going to grab this brush again, use whatever mixture I have here, and I'm just going to go over these two spots so that they match the background a little bit better. Now where this already has color underneath of it, I don't want to make the color darker, so I'm using sort of a little bit more watery of the same color. So I kind of took from where the color was a little bit lighter versus then taking from where it's a little bit darker, because this may dry just a little bit darker than the rest of it, but that's okay.